Okay, today we will continue with our third presentation of this series of 3 presentations, and a very important section of the principle of creation is the 3 blessing. So this is the Genesis 1:28. Then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." So, in summary, we say that the 3 blessing is to be fruitful, multiply, and dominion. And this also provides us the purpose in life, or rather the purpose of God's creation. However, the word is 3 blessing, but we take it as the purpose in fulfilling fruitfulness, multiply, and then dominion. Even teaching Christian ministers about this became a big challenge. So it is based on true family values that the understanding of 3 blessing became more accepted by Christian ministers. I would like to provide an understanding of 3 blessing more in terms of understanding God's essence and our essence, and how we can establish conjugal love, which is the foundation of true family values. Yeah. Okay, put it in a graphical form. The 3 blessing, basically, first blessing is centering on our mind and body. Our unity in heart with God will bring about mind and body unity, and based on that, we become what we call perfected individual before God. But what is perfection? It's more in terms of heart, that we become filial sons and daughters of God. Okay? But God wanted us to establish not only as filial sons and daughters of God, but to multiply this first blessing between husband and wife. So based on that, sinless children can be born, establishing sinless family, tribe, society, nation, and one world family, based on the second blessing of multiply. But it's also important to understand that God wanted to establish Adam and Eve as true parents. Okay? True parents. And based on that, God can be the true parents of heaven, earth, and humankind. And the third blessing is the creation is created in the image of man. Even though man is created the last of God's creation, but the ideal of man is the very model for which God created the creation. So the creation is like the reflection of the ideal man and woman. And man is like the microcosm. And if that have happened, then man and woman will be the Lord of creation, and heaven and earth will be dominated by the direct dominion of God's love. Okay, so this is the third blessing. Now, explaining the 3 blessings as fruitfulness, multiply, and dominion, it gives the understanding that this tree blessing was supposed to be stage 1, growth, formation, growth, and then completion. But this is 3 great blessing. Okay. So I would understand the fulfillment of these 3 great blessing with 3 concentric circles, okay, rather than the 3 stages. And that understanding is important because the understanding of fruitfulness, multiply, we have to understand fruitfulness in terms of perfected Adam and Eve. Okay. So the perfection of Adam and Eve also entails the perfection of Adam and Eve as a couple. So in this sense, it is not just 3 stages in terms of fruitfulness, multiply, and have dominion. So let's first start with the first blessing. What does it mean to be fruitful? So it is one heart with God. And Jesus is the one who spoke of this first blessing of fruitfulness. He said that I'm in the Father and the Father in me. Okay. And he also said that he who has seen me has seen the Father. So this one heart with God, and that we should have the divine nature of God in us, that we become the dwelling place of God. This first blessing of fruitfulness. Let's continue with this understanding. So I would say that someone who is one heart with God means my thoughts are God's thought and God's thoughts are my thought. And Adam and Eve would live to bring heavenly parents joy and happiness. Yeah, that filial heart, Hyojong, Adam and Eve would live for the purpose of bringing joy and happiness to God, or to relieve God's pain. And so God's pain is my pain and my pain is God's pain. That is also the understanding of fruitfulness. Okay. So when we are one in heart with God, or one become one through love, Adam's body becomes God's body, and God embodied in Adam become one, and Adam's mind and God's mind become one. So God can fully feel the image of God, of Adam, and the image of Eve, both Adam and Eve. Yeah. So Adam is the God's body in substantial form. That's why in 1 Corinthians 3:16, do you not know that you are God's temple? So what is a temple? The temple is God's dwelling place, so that God can dwell in us. God can reside in us. Yeah. That is why God has been striving to build this temple of universal love in Adam's heart. And from the power of love generated there, bring the flower of love into bloom. That is also an understanding of fruitfulness from the perspective of heart. Now, since fruitfulness entails God's heavenly parents' heart towards his children, Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve demonstrating filial heart to God, let us understand what is absolute faith, this heavenly parent's heart for his children, Adam and Eve. Absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience. Okay? And based on the attribute of the love of being absolute, unchanging, eternal, and unique. Now I'll read this because this is not something that we can just need to understand, but we need to know God's heart. And it may awaken this heart that we have, original heart that we have. Okay, so I'll read this. The concept of absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience came from God. God himself created everything with absolute faith. He completely invested himself for the sake of substantiating this ideal. He invested again and again and forgot what he had given. God is a subject being that stands upon the concept of complete obedience. So complete faith, absolute faith, and absolute love and absolute obedience really you cannot separate these three. But we can say that before God expect absolute faith or absolute love or absolute obedience from his children, he have this heart of absolute faith towards Adam and Eve. This is very, very important understanding. Continuing, God gave his total investment, forgetting what he had given and repeatedly giving still more. He gave up even any concept that something might come of what he had given. After thus emptying himself, God reached a 0 point. Since he had invested all of his absolute faith, God reached the 0 point. So that's the absolute faith of God, which means that absolute faith provides the foundation for God to relate to fallen Adam and Eve, even if they reject or abandon God. I'm sure you can recall what I would say the best definition of true love. God gives true love, but he feels ashamed that he has not given enough. That is the definition of God's true love. Yeah. So here we're talking about heart. In terms of heart, God has gave up any concept that something might come from what he had given. He reached the 0 point. Yeah. Again, this absolute faith of, yeah. So in response to this absolute faith and absolute love and absolute obedience, the filial heart of Adam and Eve should have been, they will never violate God's heart. That means they will not do anything to hurt or bring pain to God. Of course, they want to bring joy and happiness to God. Yes, that's the filial heart. But also, at the same time, they would not disobey God if it brings hurt and pain to God. So this is the filial heart attending God, and then upon that kind of heart of attendance, Adam and Eve can inherit the absolute faith and absolute love and absolute obedience from God, from Heavenly Parent. Now, let's turn to absolute love of God. Where do we connect to love? It is at a point where we become absolutely zero, where there is no trace of self. To find perfect love, there is no place for me. It is the same with faith. As God's object partner, I believe in my subject absolutely, and God as my subject partner believes in me as his object partner absolutely. In faith, there is no self. In absolute faith, there is no place for me. Faith is absolute at the 0 point. When you unite with your partner in absolute love, there is no I. So we can say that the absolute love of God means that God will love us unconditionally, even though we may reject God, abandon God, and regard God as our enemy. But God's absolute love will not, towards Adam and Eve or fallen mankind, will not change. That's the absolute love. What about absolute obedience? We say God is the father of all humankind, don't we? If he is, could he as the father tell his son and daughters that they must absolutely obey the law of love if he did not live in obedience to it himself? It is an indispensable root principle that God can teach his children to live in absolute obedience to love only because he himself does so. He can affirm that they should live that way because he himself is doing it. So we have to understand that absolute obedience to Adam and Eve means absolute obedience to the heavenly law of love, which means that if Adam and Eve choose to believe in God, then God becomes the owner of that love relationship. However, if Adam and Eve choose not to unite in heart with God, not to obey God, then whoever commits that love relationship with Adam and Eve becomes the owner. In this sense, this is the heavenly law of love, that love determines the true owner in that sense. That's why in John 8:44, you are of your father the devil, and the desire of your father you want to do. We will talk about the fall at some other point, but it's very important to understand this absolute obedience of God in terms of heavenly law of love. Now, the second blessing, again, we have to understand is based on this filial heart that Adam and Eve demonstrate towards God and inherit the absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience from God. But here, in the context of a family, the filial heart of us towards our parents become the basis for conjugal love when we are married to our spouse. That person is a filial son or daughter. Can you form a relation of love with God, which is prerequisite for forming a relationship of love with your spouse? This is a heavenly rule and a principle of creation. Before you start thinking about your ideal partner, you first need to form a bond of love with your parents, such that they can proclaim you publicly as a filial child. This means you need to completely unite with your parents. In addition to practice true filial piety, you must also create unity among your siblings. So in this sense, there is this relationship of love, first with parents, and then as with your partner, but also with your siblings. Also, our love relationship of our siblings also determine conjugal love as well. But filial love towards parents is the prerequisite to conjugal love. It's very important to understand this. So we already mentioned this in our first presentation, that the foundation of morality and ethics is based on the foundation of love of God between husband and wife, parent and children. So this is re-emphasizing this foundation of morality and ethics when we talk about the first blessing and second blessing, establishing it between a couple and then establishing it within the family. And also we already mentioned about this, that why is it that God created humankind? There are three reasons. The first was to experience love or substantialize love. Okay. The second was to assume a body in Adam and Eve. The third was to become the true parents, the true parent of humankind. By having Adam and Eve establishing that position as true parents of humankind first, then God would have become the true parents of heaven, earth, and humankind. Now, marriage is increasingly the last choice that man and woman would choose. Since 1960, marriage is not the number one choice of those who are romantically involved. So why do we marry then? So it's important to understand why is it that God wanted Adam and Eve to be blessed in marriage? We are born for the sake of love. They marry to possess God. We also marry to resemble God. And why do we have children? And many people who are married or those who have relationship, they don't want to have children. Big problem. Even in Asian society where filial piety is the basis of, the foundation of the family. Having children is no longer something that couples have desire of. So our children enable us to experience deeply the heart of God, the subject partner who created the entire universe through love. Once you have your own children without anyone teaching you, you realize the importance of filial piety towards your parents. And the other very important understanding, which we don't have the time to talk about, is the understanding of four-position foundation. There's four-position foundation here, and the triple objective purpose. But the application of the triple objective purpose is very important. That husband and wife unity brings unity to the universe. And the hierarchy of love is love God, love your spouse, and love children. And you will find that in many cases where there is problems in the family, this order is not there. In terms of husband position, my wife is the daughter of God. She's my wife, and she's the mother to my children. My sons and daughters are sons and daughters of God before being our son and daughter. Wife position, my husband is the son of God. Before he's my husband, and he's the father to my children. My son and daughter is the son and daughter of God before being our son and daughter. Child's position is that my father is the son of God, husband to my mother before being the father to me. My mother is the daughter of God, wife to my father before being the mother to me. So there is this hierarchy of love and value And it is this hierarchy of love and value that must have been violated at the time of the fall, that brought about the fall. And this is rarely taught in the fall of man, unfortunately. The third blessing is dominion of love, that man is created to be the Lord of creation. Okay? So when God created human beings as the Lord of creation, he placed them as the center of heaven and earth. Because the creation is created in the image of man. Man is created in the image of God. So man is like the microcosm of the creation. And the creation is the reflection of man. So in so many ways, man can see himself or herself in creation. That's why they are created to be the Lord of creation based on the dominion of love. Also why in the Bible in Romans 8:19, for the creation waits with eager longing for the revealings of the sons of God. Now this is a very beautiful, I will read this because it brings out so much feelings and heart. Contemplate nature with the heart of God. When you look at a flower, you should do so with the heart of God. When you look at insects, birds, or all other animals, your inner feelings should connect with the heart of God. If there were a person like this who could connect with the heart of God, even one who could not explain nature through the logic of science using formulas and definition, could not express feeling through literature, could not display the beauty of nature through art, or had no energy to feel the love of nature, still that person would be a great scientist, writer, artist, philosopher, and religious leader. I'm always reminded that St. Francis of Assisi once visited a place where there was an animal that kills people. So he went and looked for the animal to educate that animal. He must have gone there to scold that animal. That kind of heart man was supposed to have, you know. And so when the first man that walked on the earth, he was so fascinated, not the moonwalk, not the moon, not the skies of the stars, but he was mesmerized by planet Earth. It suddenly struck me that that tiny pea, pretty and blue, was the Earth. I put up my thumb and shut one eye, and my thumb blotted out the planet Earth. I didn't feel like a giant. I felt very, very small. When you look at planet Earth from above, it's so beautiful. Nothing is more beautiful than planet Earth because that is the very home that God created for us. If we have eyes to see and heart of God, we would see that beauty no matter where we are on earth. We are supposed to be that Lord of creation. So very quickly, if man have established this oneness in heart with God, we would have received God's three blessing, okay? And enter into eternally under the perfect dominion of God's love in the spirit world when we die, okay? And establish the three unities of mind and body, husband and wife, parent and children in the family, okay? And family harmony based on filial love. And this would establish the kingdom of heaven on earth and the kingdom of heaven in the spirit world.